Hello everyone, I'm Madeline, your host, and welcome to our 6th installment of The Way Forward. Today we're going to review some of the key points that we've discussed so far. If you've made it this far, I do appreciate it. I've hit you with a lot of information. It includes cognitive, social, developmental, and clinical psychology, as well as neurobiology. In fact, I've included material from my own research papers. What should have taken me 4 years to complete ended up taking me 6. I took my time because I wanted to learn everything that I could get my hands on, to understand what the hell happened. Why do these religions exist in the first place? What was my role, my upbringing? Why did I end up in this broken place? And how do I stop hurting myself and begin to heal? I'm here with you now because I want to share some of what I learned with you. I just hope I can do so adequately. Before beginning this review, I want to talk a little more about the 2 hemispheres of the brain that we spoke about in episode 5, and how they process information very differently. And you might begin to see how this plays out as we go on to review the other episodes. So I described the right hemisphere as a synthesizer. It takes in all of the sensory information around you to form a whole picture of reality. But there's way too much information to process on a moment-to-moment basis. It would be incapacitating. So the left brain, it comes to the rescue to do what it does best. It acts as a computer processor, selecting from the right hemisphere only what it needs to survive as an independent being, and filters out the rest. It takes this information and it compares it to what you've already learned and searches for patterns. And this is how it makes sense of the world. It creates expectations of reality. The left hemisphere, it creates your reality by forming mental representations and uses language to attach labels and meaning to them. Then using imagination, it projects these representations into the future to predict possible outcomes. Your left hemisphere scripts your personal narrative of who you believe you are based on your memories, your current environment, and your future projections. It is your ego that creates for you a sense of self as a separate and unique being, apart from everything and everyone else, which is incredible. But it's the right hemisphere where we predominantly experience empathy. It is self-aware as a whole and complete. Its existence is pure and authentic. I've provided scholarly reference material because I want to assure you that everything I've stated thus far is backed up by rigorous scientific research. I've made no claims beyond that. That said, I've introduced language that may feel a little jarring. Admittedly, describing the right hemisphere's sense of self as I am might have been a little startling to you. And if so, may I suggest why? Because it broke your expectation. At indescribable speed, without your even realizing it, your left brain took that piece of information and compared it to what you've already learned. Your left brain analyzed it for deeper meaning, searching for a recognizable pattern. It got your attention, but my intended meaning may have been lost. So I'm going to clarify that. On this next slide, remember the major components of the self. So there's self-concept, who we believe we are based on our values and our worldview. There's our social self, meaning our roles in the world and our group identity. We have self-esteem or self-worth. In other words, how we evaluate or rate ourselves. And finally, self-knowledge, meaning I know why I believe and feel and act a certain way, and I can predict how I will do so in the future. And all of this is fraught with thinking errors that we're not even aware of. Let's look and see how the brain processes these self aspects. Here on the screen, you see the right hemisphere. The self is pure, aware of itself, and exists just as it is, just as I am. The left brain says, I am a good person in the world. That's your self-concept. It says, I am a mother or a son or a sister or an American or a Republican. That's your social self. It says, I am really smart or I am extremely kind. So that would be your self-esteem. And I am me. I believe I know my present self and can predict how my future self will think, feel, and behave. In simplest terms, your left brain helps you to exist, to navigate, and to survive in your reality. Your ego resides here, and it wants identity, relevance, and a sense of control in a frightening, unpredictable world. These are built-in mechanisms that ensure our very survival. The right brain simply is, without the mental chatter and the stories that our left brain tells us. It is the quieter inner you that you've lost touch with, because life is so difficult and stressful and full of tragedy, and you've had to survive as an individual being in a harsh world, even at the expense of your innermost being. Life first, right? We have to survive. But we also have to remember who we really are. So let's do the review now. And we're going to fly through these slides fairly quickly, but they are presented in much more detail in prior episodes. In Lesson 1, we talked about the subtle and overt characteristics of abusive leadership, designed to bolster power through manipulation, elitism, toxic teachings, and sanctioned abuse. These are positions that often exist in religious institutions that have low accountability, and these positions are gained with unearned valor and inadequate expertise. The soft targets being the vulnerable ones, including victims or those leaving or who've left, as well the religious and spiritual trauma that results when leaders abuse their authority, and also the re-traumatization that victims endure as they are shamed, blamed, and silenced. The poor outcomes including PTSD and complex PTSD. In Lesson 2, we discussed internal locus of control, or self-agency. In other words, do we see ourselves as the helpless victim in life, at the mercy of external forces, authority figures, and others' behavior? Or do we see ourselves as the author of our life, in control of our own being, our internal state, and importantly, the way we respond to life? Individuals with internal locus of control are motivated to set goals to improve their life. They take accountability for their failures and responsibility for their success. They experience better outcomes with health, education, and career, as well better leadership and parenting style, and more resilience in life. We discuss the importance of belonging to healthy, stable groups in developing this sense of self-agency, and the importance of raising children in environments where they too can develop a healthy sense of self-agency. Christiane also introduced practical communication strategies that are used in business negotiations, team building, conflict management, and problem solving. And these can be applied to everyday life to help make communication a little easier by setting a respectful tone, asking questions, and listening with the intent to learn rather than merely being right, especially where conversations can be challenging, even one-sided and demeaning. For example, to the person that has questions or who's left the religion. Lesson 3 took a more focused look at abusive leadership, namely the personality characteristics of authoritarianism. This is fueled by anger, hostility, and feelings of victimization. There's a pervasive sense of threat that propels the individual to seek power at all cost of others, or to blindly follow strong leaders. Their core values are security, conformity, and loyal obedience to strong leaders. And their attitudes include a black and white worldview, resistance to new information, idealization of leaders, and dehumanization of outgroups. Authoritarians use arbitrary rules, scare and shaming tactics, punishment, and ridicule to demean their targets, to gain dominance and suppress dissent. And they'll do all this in the name of a higher power. They are intrusive of others' boundaries and obsessed with rules and control. They keep score with enemies, whether real or perceived. And I discussed authoritarian-style parenting, its characteristics, and its effect on children and later adulthood, so that we can be aware of these tendencies that we may have unconsciously carried with us, and to learn authoritative-style parenting so that our kids grow up best equipped to enter adulthood with self-agency. In Lesson 4, we discussed altruism, which is the attitude of unselfish caring about the welfare of others and doing acts that help others without benefit to oneself or expectation of a return. And we discussed what altruism does for both the giver and the receiver, called the happiness effect. We use the hormone and neurotransmitter called oxytocin as an example of the cascade of effects on our physiology and psychology when we show and receive acts of kindness. Oxytocin elicits feelings of happiness, love, trust, and closeness, and it is produced during intimacy between couples, between mother and baby while nursing, when people sing together, during exercise, and between dogs and their owners when they lock gazes. And what this demonstrates is that in a very literal way, we have a profound effect on each other's psychology and physiology, and we can choose behaviors to improve our internal and external environment and our relationships. And when others perceive us as having equanimity, in other words, mental calmness, composure, and evenness of temper, including in difficult situations, well, this self-agency, being in control of our behavior rather than being reactive, well, others then treat us differently, and this boosts our self-confidence. In Lesson 5, of course, I talked about how we form our sense of self, and the poor outcomes from social rejection for youths especially, when our need for group acceptance is not met. And these outcomes include low self-esteem, anxiety, depression, and behavioral problems. I also discussed a phenomenon known as identity fusion. What happens when an individual loses their sense of identity and personal boundaries to a group, leading to actions that benefit the group at personal cost, and how ostracism can actually intensify identity fusion, leading one to go through hoops just to reestablish their place within the group, because our need for group membership and belonging is so strong. Frequently throughout the series, we've also talked about the psychophysiological stress cycle and how when we're under pressure, we become hypervigilant, and our nervous system revs up our body to get ready for fight or flight. Our brain is designed to be energy efficient, and we have an upper limit of brain capacity that we can use at any given time. Stress interferes with our higher cognitive abilities, along with our language and our behavior. We literally can't think straight and have to rely all the more on our emotional and often faulty mental shortcuts. And this keeps us from learning new perspectives based on new information or new evidence. We get stuck in our left brains, our narratives, ruminating about the past and fretting over the future events that we cannot possibly predict nor have any control over. But when we learn calmness, to take a step back from our knee-jerk reactions and our faulty thinking patterns, well, our physiology changes in such a way that enables us to utilize our higher cognitive abilities. Most importantly, we've stressed choosing our responses rather than merely reacting to our environments. By doing so, we take command of our own internal state of being and positively affecting those around us. One of the ways we can do this is through meditation, which calms the stress response cycle and restores balance so that we can focus. But it isn't the only way to achieve this. To be clear, a meditative state is a shift in one's awareness away from our internal dialogues and mental chatter over everyday life to a more focused, in the present awareness. It is not relinquishing control of one's mind. To the contrary, the individual becomes more alert and aware. This also happens naturally when we engage in favorite activities such as walking in nature and during prayer. It helps the brain to rewire itself in part by strengthening connectivity between hemispheres. With practice, it quiets the stress cycle, increases focus, and allows one to experience life more from the right hemisphere, making room for more love, gratitude, empathy, and joy. And this all inspires compassion and acts of kindness for oneself and to others. This is how your brain is designed. A baby's natural state is love. When their physical and emotional needs are met, they exist in pure love. Think about that. And think about the fact that little children live predominantly in their right brain. And Jesus said to be like these. But our modern lives have robbed us of our natural and truest inner being, where peace and tranquility reside. To wrap things up, I recently learned that Fixing My Faith's audience is comprised of 50% Christian, 20% atheist, and 30% spiritual. To those who are Christian, my personal belief is that we don't take Jesus' command to love seriously enough. We take the simplest command and formalize it, adding our own left brain assumptions, insisting on the correct way. Or we insist that love is conditional. First there must be a righteous judgment. Putting doctrinal differences aside, suspend judgment, and let's look with fresh eyes, a new lens. To those who remain skeptical, perhaps you simply cannot reconcile things in the Bible with your inner sense of ethics and morality, and I get that. Instead, let's look at the historical figure who founded Buddhism more than 2,500 years ago. And archaeological evidence has confirmed his existence. He sought to understand the source of human suffering and how to transcend suffering by letting go of selfish material cravings. He taught the importance of compassion, kindness, wisdom, and generosity. His message was that of love, to ease the suffering of others. Believe in the principles by which he lived, and believe in the science. To those who identify as spiritual, well, I'm preaching to the choir. There is only one ultimate reality, but it's beyond our awareness. Because our sensory organs take in only a certain bandwidth of sensory information, and then our left brain filters much of that out. There are many interpretations of reality. What is ultimate truth? It's simple. God is love. This channel, as we stated at the very beginning, is to learn some fascinating facts about how our brain works, to talk about some of the dynamics that shaped our experiences, many of which share undeniable commonalities, and to share ways of communicating within difficult relationships. For instance, when an individual leaves and finds themselves judged and criticized by those still in. This podcast is intended to be neutral, educative, with academic integrity, and to always come back to the principle of equanimity and self-agency, to choose your responses in life rather than react. Take away what serves you, and I hope it serves you well. Dismiss whatever doesn't. As Christian stated in the very beginning, we are working with ideas here. Ideas are like kites. If they fly, then all is well. And if they fall, well, it's just a kite. You can try again with a new one, a new idea. Now, don't throw caution to the wind either. I'm not saying to be gullible. You are still responsible to remain safe and housed and fed and able to face the next day. Only you can govern your own speed at which you move. Understanding doesn't replace conventional wisdom. Life is unpredictable, so keep your wits about you. Be cautious and alert, but don't live in fear. Be fair and be firm. Choose to live more from your right brain, in however way suits you. Hiking, painting, gardening, praying, or sitting quietly and focusing on slowing down your breath. Make time for yourself to let go of labels. Feel gratitude. Be happy and in awe in every moment that you can, and to aspire to something bigger than yourself. Do things that naturally release oxytocin in your brain, such as acts of kindness. Meditation is powerful, but whatever way works for you, do it. Suspend judgment and choose to look for goodwill. When we choose love over fear, the brain begins to rewire and repair itself. Whether from a Christian, an Eastern, or a scientific perspective, fear is the enemy. Love is the miracle that heals. In our next episode, we'll discuss the nervous system and take a closer look at what is happening in the brain and body when under chronic unresolved stress, as well as the poor health outcomes that result. We'll include a simple breathing exercise that you can do naturally and discreetly at any time that helps calm down the stress response cycle. In later episodes, we'll also talk about how we project our own ego out onto the world and form inaccurate judgments about ourselves and others. We'll devote an episode to the dark emotion of fear and the effects of exposure to violent and fearful forms of media, especially in our children. We'll also take a little dive into the connection between epigenetics and intergenerational trauma. There's a lot to cover, folks, so we hope you'll join us again. Take care, everyone. Bye for now.